Hello friends, welcome to Crime Chronicles US, where America's unsolved mysteries, vanished criminals, and chilling cases come alive. Every story is real, every detail matters, and the truth remains buried in the shadows. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to stay updated with every mystery. The story of Harold Frederick Shipman begins quietly, almost mundanely. In the kind of ordinary English landscape that rarely suggests the presence of extraordinary evil. Born on January 14, 1946 in Nottingham, Shipman grew up in a working-class household where expectations were clear and discipline was firm. His father worked as a lorry driver, a steady if unremarkable job, while his mother, Vera, was the emotional center of the family. She was ambitious for her son, convinced that Harold was destined for something better, something elevated above the limitations of their circumstances. From an early age, Shipman absorbed this belief, internalizing a sense of superiority that would quietly shape his character. Teachers described him as intelligent, reserved, and confident to the point of arrogance. He excelled academically, especially in science, and his path toward medicine appeared not only logical, but inevitable. Yet beneath this image of the promising young student was a developing emotional detachment, a difficulty forming deep connections, and an early fascination with control, authority, and the idea of being indispensable. A pivotal moment in Shipman's youth occurred when his mother was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. Vera Shipman's illness unfolded slowly and painfully, a drawn-out decline that left a deep impression on her teenage son. As her pain worsened, her doctor administered morphine to ease her suffering, and Harold witnessed firsthand the profound effect the drug had, transforming agony into calm, restoring dignity in the final days of life. When his mother died in 1963, Shipman was just 17 years old. Her death devastated him, but it also planted a dangerous seed. The image of a physician wielding the power to relieve pain and determine the moment of peace became etched into his psyche. For Shipman, morphine was no longer just a medicine. It was a symbol of authority over life and death, a power he would one day claim as his own. Shipman entered Leeds School of Medicine in 1965, a respected institution that further reinforced his belief in his own exceptionalism. He married Primrose May Oxtoby while still a student, presenting himself as stable, responsible, and conventional. To classmates and instructors, Shipman was diligent and capable, though not especially warm. He graduated in 1970 and began working as a general practitioner, first in Pontefract. It was here that troubling patterns began to emerge, though they went largely unnoticed at the time. Shipman developed an addiction to pethidine, an opioid painkiller similar to morphine. He manipulated prescriptions, forged signatures, and abused his position to obtain the drug. In 1975, his addiction was discovered, and he was charged with forging prescriptions. The court fined him and required him to attend a drug rehabilitation program. Remarkably, he avoided prison, and even more remarkably, he was allowed to continue practicing medicine after completing treatment. This moment, later viewed as a catastrophic failure of oversight, marked the first clear opportunity to stop Harold Shipman before his crimes escalated. After his conviction, Shipman relocated to Hyde, Greater Manchester, where he joined a group practice at the Donnybrook Medical Center. To colleagues, he appeared reformed, sober, and committed. Patients found him attentive and reassuring, particularly elderly women, who made up a large portion of his clientele. He made house calls, spoke calmly, and projected absolute confidence. In a medical system increasingly strained by time constraints, Shipman's willingness to visit patients at home made him seem compassionate and old-fashioned in the best sense. Families trusted him, they believed him, and that trust became the foundation upon which one of the most prolific murder sprees in modern history was built. By the late 1980s, Shipman had established his own solo practice at the Market Street Surgery in Hyde. Working alone gave him autonomy, privacy, and control, eliminating the oversight that might have exposed his actions sooner. Deaths among his patients began to increase, though not in a way that immediately raised alarms. Most of the deceased were elderly. Many had existing health conditions, and deaths occurred at home, often with Shipman present. He frequently certified the deaths himself, citing natural causes. Cremation forms were signed without objection. The pattern, though statistically abnormal, blended into the background noise of expected mortality among aging populations. What was not understood at the time was that Shipman had resumed using diamorphine, medical-grade heroin, not for personal addiction, but as a tool of murder. He administered lethal doses to patients who did not need pain relief, often without their knowledge, ending their lives quickly and quietly. Shipman's method was chillingly simple. He would visit a patient, often an elderly woman living alone, and administer an injection under the pretense of medical treatment. Within minutes, the patient would lose consciousness and die. Shipman would then contact relatives or authorities, calmly reporting the death as expected or peaceful. His demeanor was composed, professional, and convincing. He did not panic, did not rush, and did not behave like someone hiding a crime. This calmness disarmed suspicion and reinforced his image as a trusted family doctor. In some cases, Shipman altered medical records after death, adding false notes to justify the administration of drugs or to exaggerate the severity of the patient's condition. These alterations went unquestioned, protected by the assumption that doctors do not lie about their patients. As the deaths accumulated, subtle concerns began to surface. Funeral directors in Hyde noticed that Shipman seemed to be associated with an unusually high number of deaths, particularly among elderly women. Some families felt uneasy about how suddenly their loved ones had died, especially when they had appeared relatively well earlier that day. A few patients requested second opinions or expressed discomfort with Shipman's approach, describing him as abrupt or dismissive when challenged. Yet, these concerns rarely reached authorities, and when they did, they were dismissed or inadequately investigated. The idea that a respected general practitioner could be deliberately killing patients was almost unthinkable within the medical and legal culture of the time. One of the most critical failures occurred in 1998 when the local coroner raised concerns about the high number of cremation forms signed by Shipman. An internal review was conducted, but it was superficial and flawed. Investigators failed to examine full medical histories or to recognize the statistical anomalies present in Shipman's practice. The review concluded that there was no evidence of wrongdoing. This clearance effectively reassured Shipman that he was untouchable. Instead of slowing down, his killings continued. The case that finally unraveled Shipman's crimes began with the death of Kathleen Grundy, a 81-year-old former mayor of Hyde. Grundy was active, mentally sharp, and in good health for her age. On June 24, 1998, Shipman visited her home. Later that day, she was found dead in her living room. Shipman certified her death as due to old age. Shortly afterward, Grundy's daughter, Angela Woodruff, a solicitor, discovered a will purportedly written by her mother, leaving the majority of her estate to Shipman. The will was riddled with irregularities. The signature looked forged. The language was uncharacteristic. Woodruff immediately suspected foul play and contacted the police. Unlike previous concerns, this one could not be quietly dismissed. The investigation into Grundy's death led to exhumation and toxicological analysis, which revealed lethal levels of diamorphine in her body. As police examined other deaths linked to Shipman, a horrifying pattern emerged. Dozens of bodies were exhumed. Many showed the same cause of death. Medical records were scrutinized, and inconsistencies multiplied. Shipman was arrested in September 1998. During questioning, he denied all wrongdoing, maintaining his composure and insisting that he was the victim of a misunderstanding. Even as evidence mounted, he showed little emotion, little fear, and no remorse. P.S. The scale of Shipman's crimes gradually became apparent, shocking not only the public, but the medical profession itself. The idea that a single doctor, operating within the National Health Service, could murder patients over decades without detection forced a painful reckoning. Trust, the cornerstone of medical practice, had been exploited in its purest form. Families who had mourned loved ones as victims of natural causes now faced the devastating truth that those deaths had been intentional, unnecessary, and preventable. Each exhumation reopened wounds, transforming grief into horror and anger. As the trial approached, prosecutors faced the immense challenge of proving not just individual murders, but a sustained pattern of killing carried out by someone uniquely positioned to conceal it. They focused on a smaller number of cases with the strongest evidence, knowing that even these would be difficult to explain to a jury conditioned to trust doctors. Shipman, meanwhile, remained outwardly calm, continuing to insist on his innocence. He showed no interest in explaining his actions, no attempt to justify himself, and no empathy for the families of the dead. His silence became part of the mystery, leaving investigators and psychologists to speculate about his motives. Was he driven by a God complex, by resentment, by a desire for control, or by something darker and more personal rooted in his past? The answers, if they existed at all, were locked inside a man who refused to speak. By the time the trial began in October 1999, Harold Shipman stood accused of murdering 15 patients, though authorities suspected the true number was far higher. The courtroom became a stage on which decades of unchecked power, institutional failure, and misplaced trust were laid bare. Each victim's story painted a picture not just of individual loss, but of a system that had allowed one man to operate beyond scrutiny. As witnesses testified and evidence was presented, the calm facade Shipman had maintained for years began to crack, not through emotional collapse, but through the overwhelming weight of proof. The image of the caring family doctor dissolved, replaced by something far more disturbing. A man who had turned the act of healing into a weapon. As the trial unfolded, the prosecution carefully constructed a narrative that dismantled Harold Shipman's cultivated image piece by piece. Medical experts testified that the doses of diamorphine found in the victims' bodies were far beyond what would ever be prescribed for pain management, especially for patients who were not terminally ill. Pathologists explained how the drug would have acted quickly, suppressing respiration and causing death within minutes, often without outward signs of struggle. Family members described their loved ones as alert and stable just hours before Shipman's visits, contradicting his claims that death was imminent or expected. The cumulative effect of these testimonies was devastating. What emerged was not a series of unfortunate coincidences, but a clear, deliberate pattern of killing, carried out with clinical precision. Shipman sat through it all in silence, rarely reacting, his face impassive, his posture rigid, offering no explanation and no defense beyond blanket denial. The jury was confronted with a deeply unsettling reality, that a man entrusted with the care of the vulnerable had instead preyed upon them. Prosecutors emphasized Shipman's control over every stage of death, from administering the fatal injection to certifying the cause, altering records, and reassuring grieving families. This control, they argued, was not incidental, but central to his actions. It allowed him to operate invisibly, shielded by the authority of his profession. When the forged will of Kathleen Grundy was introduced, it provided a rare glimpse into possible motive, suggesting greed, entitlement, or perhaps a sense of being owed something by those he killed. Yet even this explanation felt incomplete. The sums involved were modest compared to the scale of the crimes. The murders seemed to serve something deeper, something less tangible than money. On January 31st, 2000, the jury returned its verdict. Harold Shipman was found guilty of 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the judge recommending that he never be released. As the sentence was read, Shipman showed no visible reaction. There was no outburst, no protest, no sign of remorse. Families of the victims wept, not only in relief that justice had been served, but in the crushing realization that the true number of victims might never be known. The court acknowledged this uncertainty, noting that Shipman's silence and the limitations of evidence meant that many deaths would remain officially unexplained, even if they were widely believed to be murders. In the aftermath of the conviction, a public inquiry was launched to examine how Shipman had been able to kill for so long without detection. The inquiry's findings were staggering. It concluded that Shipman had murdered at least 215 patients, with the possibility that the true number exceeded 250. These killings spanned more than 2 decades. The report detailed systemic failures across multiple institutions, including inadequate monitoring of death rates, lax oversight of controlled drugs, and an unquestioning culture of trust within medicine. Doctors were rarely challenged. Death certificates were accepted at face value. Complaints from families were minimized or dismissed. Each safeguard that might have stopped Shipman existed in theory, but failed in practice. The inquiry forced a fundamental reassessment of medical regulation in the United Kingdom. New systems were introduced to monitor prescribing patterns, particularly for controlled substances. Death certification procedures were tightened. The role of coroners was expanded, and greater emphasis was placed on transparency and accountability within healthcare. These changes were necessary, but they came too late for Shipman's victims. For their families, reform offered little comfort. Many struggled with guilt, wondering if they should have questioned Shipman more forcefully, if they should have insisted on second opinions, if they could have done anything to save their loved ones. The truth, as the inquiry made clear, was that the burden of responsibility lay not with them, but with a system that had failed to protect them. Psychologists, and criminologists attempted to analyze Shipman in the years following his conviction, searching for insight into his motivations. Some described him as possessing traits of narcissism and psychopathy, marked by a lack of empathy and a need for control. Others pointed to his relationship with his mother, suggesting that her death and the role of morphine in easing her suffering may have shaped his beliefs about death and his right to administer it. There were theories that he viewed himself as a kind of arbiter, deciding when lives were no longer worth living. Yet these interpretations remain speculative. Shipman refused to participate in psychological evaluations. He wrote no confession, offered no explanation, and granted no interviews that might have illuminated his inner world. In this silence, he denied his victims and their families any sense of closure or understanding. On January 13, 2004, the day before his 58th birthday, Harold Shipman was found dead in his prison cell, having hanged himself. His suicide provoked outrage and anguish among the families of his victims. Many felt robbed of the opportunity to see him confront the full weight of his crimes. Others believed his death was a final act of control, allowing him to escape further scrutiny and deny answers to those he had harmed. The timing of his suicide, so close to his birthday, struck some as symbolic, though its meaning, like so much about Shipman, remained unclear. In death, as in life, he left questions unanswered. The legacy of Harold Shipman is one of profound betrayal. He exploited the most fundamental trust in society, the trust between doctor and patient. He entered homes as a healer and left behind death, grief, and confusion. His crimes shattered the assumption that medical professionals are inherently benevolent, forcing an uncomfortable acknowledgement that authority, when left unchecked, can be weaponized. The reforms that followed his conviction have undoubtedly saved lives, but they stand as reminders of a cost paid in human lives rather than abstract lessons. For the families of Shipman's victims, the passage of time has not erased the pain. Many continue to remember the moment they learned the truth, the shock of discovering that a peaceful death had been a murder, and that the person responsible was someone they trusted implicitly. Their loved ones were not dying, they were killed. That distinction matters deeply, reshaping memories and altering the meaning of final moments. The ordinary rituals of grief were replaced by a darker, more complex mourning, one that included anger, betrayal, and unanswered questions. Harold Shipman never offered remorse, never sought forgiveness, and never explained himself. His story is not one of redemption or revelation, but of silence and devastation. It serves as a warning about the dangers of unquestioned authority and the necessity of vigilance, even in professions built on care and compassion. In the end, Shipman's victims are remembered not only as individuals whose lives were taken, but as the reason a system was forced to confront its own failures. Their deaths, though senseless and tragic, compelled change. And in that change lies the only measure of meaning that can be drawn from one of the darkest chapters in modern criminal history. So friends, if you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Crime Chronicles US for more chilling, unsolved mysteries from across America. Stay curious, and we'll see you in the next story.